They taught him to fold, to make his shoulders small, his voice smaller, to let the world mistake cunning for collapse. In a cell that smelled of bleach and old lies, the Joker lay on a mattress like a man who had finally run out of tricks, watching the guards trade jokes about the broken clown they'd caged. It was the oldest trick in a long career of tricks. Pretend to be weak until everyone leans in, then pull the room apart with a smile. The first laugh that met him in the morning was careless, the kind that believes mercy and weakness are the same thing. He let it land. He smiled with the kind of softness that makes people forget how sharp teeth can be. Under the fluorescent hum, a new hierarchy formed around him. Pity, patronage, the sloppy trust of men who never learned to doubt what they wanted to see. That trust would be currency. That pity would be a blade. He had come to prison not because he miscalculated fate, but because fate, and the city that made it, needed to be taught a lesson only a broken Joker could deliver. The real game began the moment everyone agreed he was harmless. They let him be small, because small is easier to swallow. For a week, he ate the same gray meat and listened while men measured their worth by how loud they could shout. He learned names the way other people learn birdsong. The guard on the second shift, who hummed to himself. The old electrician, who still carried a photo of a daughter he never saw. The quiet man who read law books until his eyes went unreadable. He folded into the smallness with practiced gentleness, a smile that asked nothing and collected everything. Looks like the world chewed you up. Marco, a broad-shouldered lifer with a tattooed neck, said the second day, leaning against the toilet stall with a cigarette already stubbed into the sink. Why smile? Marco loved to ask that like it was a riddle. Because, the Joker said softly, smiles are cheaper than explanations. The answer satisfied Marco, who liked people who made a theater of their misery. That was how it began. Small confidences, shared cigarettes through the bars, trade of stories for favors. Men protect what they pity. They protect a thing they think they can save. He kept his eyes on the edges. A warden's handshake that lasted too long, a counselor's look that always drifted toward the blue file on his chest. He learned that the warden bought cigarettes for certain guards, and those guards bought silence from the men who worked the kitchen. The kitchen was the artery. Food passed through it. Gossip passed with it. Favors were smuggled on the underside of plates. Corruption wasn't an idea to him. It was an arrangement that could be rearranged. Once, during yard time, he let a younger inmate push him. It was a careful shove, a test disguised as bravado. The young man wanted spectacle. The rest wanted to see if the broken clown would break. When the shove came, the Joker stumbled, and everyone cheered like spectators watching a skewed play. Then, when the young man laughed and turned away, Marco stepped on his ankle with a deliberate foot and fell into the trap like a puppet. The laugh died the moment the young man realized his ankle was trapped, not by force, but by the sudden, shared knowledge that the yard now had an audience. A rumor is stronger than a fist. In 3 days, the young man's bravado was a rumor, and the rumor belonged to the Joker. "You're not weak," Marco said one night, voice low, handing him a smuggled orange, a currency of sunlight in winter months. "You're dangerous the way a dream is dangerous. You make men believe things." He let the compliment settle. Dangerous was a word the city used when it wanted to distance itself from responsibility. In his head, the Joker folded plans like paper cranes. Each one had a point. He began to unravel small arrangements. A guard who took bribes to move contraband got a rumor that his wife was seen with another man on a late-night walk. The guard, frantic and distracted, missed a delivery manifest. The manifest that showed which shipments the prison had been promised as part of the rehabilitation program. Those shipments, traced by the Joker's whispered questions to the electrician and the kitchen boys, led not to therapy rooms, but to a network of contractors who padded bills and cut corners. Each revealed name was a thread. He tugged. The city outside did not think in threads. It thought in tribunals and press releases. Inside, names bled into one another, and the warden's neat ledger showed stains the paper could not hide. The Joker wasn't interested in the ledger. He wanted the ledger's owners to confess on film, to have men who hid behind signatures forced to say aloud what they had done. Confession had a shape. It bent public sympathy toward consequences. He taught his cellmates to smile without showing teeth, to laugh in ways that sounded like sorrow and rumor. He taught them to listen. They began to feed him pills of information. A contractor's offhand remark about moving product. A counselor's complaint about being underpaid. A lawyer's prideful joke about how easy juries were to sway. Each piece slid into place. Every secret had a price. They traded secrets like playing cards, and the Joker stacked them. One night, while rain pressed against the small window like a hand, a new inmate arrived. A woman, quiet, small, as a folded letter. She carried herself like a phone call. Nobody wanted to answer. The guards left her at the end of the block and went back to their jokes. The inmates watched her walk past the Joker's cell and did what men do. They measured her for usefulness and then forgot the measurement. She sat on the edge of her bunk, looked at him, and said in a voice that folded cotton around an ache, "They told me you laugh at everything." "So I'm told," he said. Her eyes moved like someone reading a ledger. There was no pity there. There was a recognition that steeled him in a way the guards never could. "I don't want you to be weak either," she said. "Weak men break things that deserve breaking." Her words were a lamp put to paper. The Joker smiled in a way that was not small. For the first time since he arrived, his plan met a mirror. "Who told you that?" he asked. She reached into the inside of her jacket and slid a folded note across the bunk. Not a confession, not an instruction, a single line written in a hand that knew how to hurt precisely. "We are listening," it said. "We have been listening longer than you think." The handwriting was deliberate. The paper smelled faintly of rain. The Joker felt a small, old thing inside him shift. A puzzle piece he had not expected to be missing. If he had been slow, it had not been because he was outwitted. It had been because someone had already begun the game without telling him he was invited. Outside, the warden locked the exterior doors and the prison hummed with the rhythm of suppressed noise. Inside, the Joker folded the note into his palm like a coin and smiled like a man who had been given a second hand. "Funny," he said quietly, looking at the woman. "I thought I was the only one who pretended to be weak." Her smile was the first real thing that night. It was not pity. It was an answer. Then, softer, so only he could hear, she added, "You were never the only one pretending." He read the line again. The twist sat in the air. Someone else was already moving pieces on a board he had believed was his. For the first time since the city had caged him, he felt the thrill of not being the only mind in the room. They moved like weather, slow, inevitable, and impossible to stop once it had gathered itself into storm. The Joker and Nora, her name folded into the night like a promise, began to trade in truths the way other men trade contraband, not with devices or neat evidence, but with stories that could not be unremembered once they were told aloud. He taught the cell block the art of a confession that looked accidental, a drunken boast meant for a bunkmate, a whispered name meant to settle an old debt. She taught them to place the words where people outside could not help but hear them. The family of a guard who had been paid to look the other way, the contractor who bragged about contracts he had never fulfilled. Each confession was a live wire. Each one sparked a small flame in the city. The prison became an instrument tuned by rumor. A counselor's offhand admission about padded bills made its way to the warden in the form of a note slipped beneath his office door. A note written not by prisoners, but by their visitors who had learned to listen and then to talk. The warden cursed and adjusted his ledger. He considered who he might blame. His ledger began to look like a map of human decency gone missing. The man who had believed order was a matter of schedules found himself answering to a system that required courage rather than calm. Outside, the world reacted with the slowness of institutions. Statements that used the word concern, televised anchors who pretended surprise, mayors who read from prepared notes. Inside, consequences arrived faster. Men who had made money from silence found themselves short of it. One guard, who had been careful and unlucky in equal measure, came to the yard with eyes like a man who had been told he had only minutes left to make the correct choice. He chose at last to tell a truth that made him small and human on the evening news. The city, in turn, made him a footnote and kept moving. It was working because the Joker had learned one thing. Systems break where people are cheap enough to lie and stubborn enough to believe their own lies. He had taught the inmates to become inconvenient, to those who wished to be comfortable. Confessions, when they were messy and human, could not be wrapped in legalese or smoothed by spin. They stuck. "You wanted this," Nora said once, in her low, quiet way, the syllables like a match struck in a dark room. "You wanted the city to feel its own rot. I wanted the city to stop smiling like it had nothing in its teeth," he answered. "People who smile while they steal never see their mouths full." She was not satisfied with mere collapse. She wanted names taken, accounts settled. She wanted something that could be called justice. He wanted performance, the spectacle that made conscience unavoidable. They were not the same hunger, but hunger can be a companion in winter. The plan tightened. A staged fight in the yard that drew the guards and cameras. A counselor's temper flaring into a monologue that named compromises. A bunkmate who, pushed by the memory of a dead brother, told a reporter a story that made the mayor wince on live television. The dominoes fell, not because of a single grand reveal, but because truth is quietly contagious once it is released into a small, cracked place and allowed to breathe. When it seemed the city would start to reckon, when resignations were teased like slow thunder and hearings were scheduled like rain, the twist arrived in a way he had not expected. Nora pulled him aside in the dark of the laundry room, where machines hummed the prison's lullaby. "They told me to bring you in," she said simply, the words hitting him like a fist. "The people who run the hearings, some of them think cleaning house on a few names will be enough. They think you are useful. They offered me a way out if I helped them shape the narrative." Silence narrowed like a noose. He looked at her and saw the map of her choices etched on her face. "You accept?" She shrugged. "I did what I had to, but not because I trusted them." Her eyes held a small, stubborn thing. "Because I wanted to know if you were going to do the merciful thing when the city asked." He laughed then, and it was the kind of sound that could be mistaken for madness or for joy, depending on how you held it. "Mercy is a luxury reserved for those who can afford it," he said. "But there are different kinds of mercy. There is mercy that forgives and mercy that remembers." She looked at him as though translating a poem. "And which are you offering?" "Neither," he said. "I offer consequence," wearing a smile. The hearings came. They were brittle and public and full of people who wanted a photograph of their own righteousness. Some men confessed into microphones with all the theatrical remorse of actors cueing the next scene. The city applauded its own capacity for self-punishment. But for every man who fell in the light, another man stepped into the dark and tightened the web. The ledger was larger than one scandal. It was a map of compromises that needed more than a few resignations to correct. On the final night, as the city tried to sleep with its hands folded around small victories, Nora handed him a paper folded into the shape of a coin. She had been offered freedom in exchange for a certain phrasing at the hearings, language that would steer blame away from some very dangerous places. She had refused to say it. Instead, she had written something else. "You could have taken the deal," he said. She looked at him without flinching. "And let them tidy the rooms without throwing out the rot?" "No. I learned that the only way anything stays clean is if someone pulls the floorboards up and looks at what's been breeding under them." He opened the paper and read the single line she had written. No legal proof, no sensationalism, just a sentence that, when put into 1,000 mouths, would not let the city forget. "We will be watching," it read. He folded the paper back into his palm and smiled, the kind of smile that is a knife and a hymn at once. "Then watch," he said. Outside, the city pulsed with the uneasy sleep of the newly ashamed. Inside, the men on the block hummed like a choir of small, dangerous promises. Nora walked away down the corridor and, for a moment, the Joker remembered a time before masks. Small rooms, small mercies, and the terrible singularity of wanting to be seen. In the end, justice arrived in fragmented, human pieces. Some redemptive, some merely punitive. People were punished, and some were not. Apologies were made, and some were hollow. But as the city turned its eyes toward the headlines, the final twist settled like dust. The note Nora had given him, the promise that "we will be watching," was not a threat from the outside. It was a pact forged inside these walls, between men who had been ignored and a woman who would not allow their stories to be swept away. He folded his hands and thought of the many faces he had worn. He had come to teach a lesson about seeing, He left with the knowledge that sight can be shared. The last thing he heard before the lights went out was not the clank of metal, but a soft, collective breath, a readiness in the dark. He smiled as if remembering a joke only he would understand, and, for the first time in a long while, he was not pretending to be weak. Now, give me small, attractive outro. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a cape. Sometimes it wears a smile, waits patiently, and lets the world expose itself. The Joker didn't win by strength or chaos. He won by making people look. And once you truly see the truth, you can never unsee it.